In this podcast series, we've journeyed from Britain's coal-fired industrial revolution through decades of oil shocks and gas crises to arrive here at the threshold of a green energy revolution that's accelerating faster than many expected. But speed brings questions. How do we prepare for a future that seems to be rushing towards us?
This new world we're going into, where you have solar panels providing a huge amount of your power, you have wind farms, etc., that challenge is more complex. And so AI definitely has a role to make sure that we can respond to that as quickly and efficiently as possible.
In this episode, Ofgem's chief executive helps us look beyond the next decade to a fuller transformation ahead, including how artificial intelligence will reshape our energy future by 2050.
The problem will still be, how do we build the right infrastructure at lowest costs and efficiently? But equally, this problem of how do we make sure we create the right environment for customers is not new, but it's certainly going to become a bigger and more complex problem in this new world.
Plus, we focus beyond the UK to two very different nations, yet both turning heads the world over with their distinctive approaches to adopting green energy.
The Netherlands actually had, for a few years, more rooftop solar as a percentage of roofs than any country in the world, more than even Australia, which is a global place where everybody points to.
I'm Claire Nazir, and this is Inside Energy, a podcast by Ofgem, exploring how the energy we use today has evolved and how it will change in the future. Before we journey across borders, let's focus on Britain's own future. And there's one technology that keeps surfacing in these conversations: artificial intelligence. Jonathan Brearley is CEO of Ofgem.
Energy, like every sector, is right now getting its head round how we're going to use AI to improve the lives for customers out there. There's lots of different uses, but when you come back to how we're going to run this system, how we're going to minimise costs, then clearly as you move to a more renewables-focused system, we are going to see big and fast changes in generation.
Matching the unpredictability of weather to fluctuating demand for energy is a relatively new problem for energy supply, and one where AI could play a key role.
When I started in sort of mid-noughties, we were at the very early steps of this renewables transition, and the task for the system operator and for all of us on the system really was to manage between fairly fluctuating demand, pretty similar to what we have today, and these large power stations that could dial up or down. This new world we're going into, where you have solar panels providing a huge amount of your power, you have wind farms, etc., that challenge is more complex. And so AI definitely has a role to make sure that we can respond to that as quickly and efficiently as possible. So I'm really optimistic that if you think this big transition we're on is to many, many more units generating in a way that's less easy to predict, then I do think we've got the technology there to help us make the progress we need to make.
AI isn't just managing the grid from some distant control room. It's coming into our homes. Imagine it's 2035. You have solar panels on your roof, an electric car in the drive, a heat pump warming your home. Thousands of tiny decisions need to be made: when to charge, when to draw power, and when to store it.
So AI can help understand a problem and propose a solution. Really, you can minimize your bills, not only by the technology you have in your house, but how you use that electricity, how you make sure that when the wind is blowing, you're drawing power into your home. And when things are tight, when the wind isn't blowing and we're using still gas-fired generations, you don't have to draw from the grid because you have electricity already there. Now, that's going to require a vast number of very small decisions to be made for you as a customer. If you have something like AI at the heart of it, suddenly that flexible world, Claire, that I think we've all been talking about since 2008, becomes real.
This summer, 2025, we hit 40% solar generation in the UK. 5 years ago, we wouldn't have been having this conversation. Go back to 2013 and the projections, although confident, we now know were completely wrong.
We produce projections. We'd see lots more nuclear, lots more carbon capture and storage. And we were quite cautious about solar and wind for the common sense reason that, offshore wind was still, in the early days, still hard to build. And obviously, the premise was the sun doesn't shine in Britain. So, turns out you can get projections very wrong, put it that way. What we've seen, I think, is a technological revolution. So I'm very proud of the work that Contracts for Difference have done to bring down the prices of things like offshore wind. And clearly, the solar technological revolution is one that keeps going. And I think that is being accompanied by a revolution in batteries. So in terms of would we have thought it possible? Most likely not. I continue to be surprised by how fast we go once you begin to get technologies to scale and cost to reduce.
That speed brings urgency to the question, how does Britain prioritise to reach net zero?
We've got to build out the grid. So we've got to get transmission in the ground and up and running. There are new technologies like long duration storage that need to come through. But I guess the key area for me, and the thing where I think we all need to work hard, is on how we translate that to offers of flexibility and new offers for customers. What is different about the next 15 years to the last 15 years is, look, you and I, Claire, are sitting in a room using our electricity in the same way, and indeed our gas in the same way that we've done for the last 50, 60 years, honestly. We switch on our lights, we drive our cars, etc. Now, in the future, we are going to have to change that.
Change. That word carries weight when you're talking about how people heat their homes, cook their food, live their lives. And change costs money, at least up front. The entire economics of energy are shifting from fuel-based to capital-based. Instead of buying gas month after month, we're going to be investing in heat pumps, solar panels, electric vehicles, technologies that cost more up front but are cheaper to run.
How do you turn that into an offer that works for consumers? How do you make sure those costs are spread sort of in a fair way over time? And how do you make sure that consumers of all kinds are able to benefit from this system? So I think when we're designing the market for the future, we not only need to think about those of us who are early adopters and enthusiasts, but think about people who don't have the time, the energy, or the interest to try and manage their bills in a sort of detailed way. We need to help them towards what I think will be a much better system.
Investment isn't just coming from individual households. GB Energy, the government's new energy company, launched with a statement that reframed the entire conversation. They're putting solar panels on hospital roofs and car parks, initially across 70 sites, which will see an estimated combined lifetime energy bill saving of up to £65 million. Suddenly, renewable energy isn't an environmental luxury. The benefits are multiple.
We know we need a huge amount of investment to make sure we can make this transition. What I imagine happening, Claire, is that over the next few years, you may well see public-private collaborations that we haven't seen in this sector since privatisation. Our job as a regulator here is a balance. We know we need the investment, we know we need it at pace, and we know that getting it in at pace is important. But equally, we will always be on the side of the customer.
But building this future isn't without obstacles, supply chains, planning bottlenecks, political uncertainty. And there was one example that crystallises the challenge: wind farms in Scotland being paid to switch off, while gas turbines in the south switch on, because the transmission lines between them aren't built yet.
We know that we are building renewable energy at pace, and we know that networks need to keep up with that. We have what we call constraint costs, where you pay wind farms to turn off and you pay power stations down south to turn on. Over time, we need to tackle that. We owe it to customers to make sure the system is run more efficiently.
Planning is perhaps the most emotionally charged of all the challenges, because this isn't abstract. It's pylons near homes, substations in communities, infrastructure in countryside that people value.
I grew up in the southwest in the middle of nowhere, and I know and I share that the amount that we cherish the land around us, the countryside around us, and our local environment. So I know what a big decision it is for communities to see big infrastructure go anywhere near your home in that situation. What I observe is that where companies, and indeed, Ofgem and NESO, we all have a role to play in this, where communication is good, where choices are given where they can be given, and where the community sees some benefit, you have a much bigger chance of being able to get through than where that becomes a confrontational process.
And then there's the question of who will lead this transformation. not just today's leaders, but tomorrow's.
We are going to need an incredibly skilled workforce and incredibly skilled leaders to take us through this. The problem will still be, how do we build the right infrastructure at lowest costs and efficiently? But equally, this problem of how do we make sure we create the right environment for customers is not new, but it's certainly going to become a bigger and more complex problem in this new world. So I imagine we are going to be looking to those sectors that we know have been successful. So tech sectors, retail, other areas across the economy where people have been tackling this sort of problem for a long time.
A reminder that Britain has a tendency to be too hard on itself.
We will always worry about the problems. We're always worried about the things that we can't tackle. But when I travel or when I talk to my counterparts in other countries, they are absolutely looking to the UK as an example of the sort of country that has been on that transition. There's a lot to be proud of. What we've got to do, though, is also look outwards. There's a huge amount happening, right the way through from Asia through to different parts of the US as well as Europe. And there's a lot we can learn.
Look outwards. Well, that's what we're about to do, because while Britain charts its course to 2050, other nations are steering their own approaches, making their own breakthroughs, learning their own lessons. And it seems the path to clean energy isn't one size fits all. It's context, culture, and creativity combined. Picture a crocodile's jaws. The upper jaw is GDP climbing upward. The lower jaw is fossil fuel emissions. It's called crocodile economics, and for centuries those jaws moved together. Economic growth meant burning more coal, more oil, more gas. But something remarkable is happening. The crocodile's mouth is opening. GDP rises while emissions fall, or at least rise more slowly. And it's not happening in just one or two places.
Crocodile economics basically says that GDP and emissions have decoupled. Probably 90% of the world's GDP is in countries that have decoupled in absolute or relative terms, and about 70% of the population.
This is Michael Barnard, climate futurist, energy strategist, and author. He tracks decarbonisation across every continent.
So absolute terms for a decoupling means that emissions are dropping while GDP rises. Relative terms means emissions are still rising, but more slowly, but clearly more slowly than GDP. The big news this year is that China has had flat emissions and 5% growth. China moves from the relative decoupling to the absolute decoupling. Not only fuel decoupling globally, with their exports of batteries, solar panels, electric vehicles, wind turbines, transmission technologies, but they're decoupling internally with massive deployments of renewables, massive transmission projects, massive storage deployments, and a much more rapidly electrifying industrial base than the rest of the world.
And that trend can be seen elsewhere too.
So India is also decoupled in relative terms, not absolute terms. Most of Southeast Asia has decoupled. Most of Latin America, all of North America, all of Europe. If we look at South America, it's remarkably progressive in terms of decarbonization. São Paulo, as a major capital, a corner of 28 million people, had remarkably clean air. And that's because Brazil has always had flex fuel vehicles running mostly on sugarcane ethanol, a domestic crop. So it's a fascinating way to view the lens. And certainly a few years ago, major economies hadn't decoupled yet, and the world's hadn't decoupled yet. But now we are in this situation where the crocodile's jaws are opening wider and wider.
Michael has spent time studying two countries in particular, which are demonstrating very different approaches to this transition. We'll learn about Pakistan shortly. But let's start closer to home, in the Netherlands, a small, densely populated country, traditionally known as the gas station of Europe.
Rotterdam especially is a major port that is full of refineries, petrochemical industry plants, fertilizer plants, steel plants, and they are importing enormous amounts of crude oil from around the world and refining it and delivering, I think it's 79% of all aviation fuel for Europe is manufactured in the Netherlands. And those are, right now, high emissions industries.
A tough place to start a transition. But the Netherlands is taking advantage of its geography to reduce its emissions. It's using a process called carbon capture. Instead of allowing the excess CO2 produced to be emitted into the air, it's captured and piped into the empty seams of oil fields underneath the North Sea.
Another thing, they have a huge agricultural sector, and part of that is a huge greenhouse sector. I worked out that their greenhouses consume about 5 million tons of CO2 a year that's currently provided by combined heat and power reciprocating engines that provide electricity, heat, and CO2 for the greenhouses.
To provide the CO2, the Netherlands is working with the steel industry to repurpose some of its excess and safe carbon dioxide for greenhouse farmers to use.
Biogenic carbon dioxide comes from the atmosphere. That can be piped safely at those volumes to the greenhouse complexes and displace the natural gas emitted, the CO2, and then use biogenic CO2 to enhance the growth of vegetables and fruits, the flowers in the greenhouses.
The country is realising its green transition through a combination of centralised and decentralised activity. A huge move towards electric vehicles, big offshore and onshore wind farms as you would expect, but solar too.
The Netherlands actually had, for a few years, more rooftop solar as a percentage of roofs than any country in the world, more than even Australia, which is a global place where everybody points to. So the Netherlands actually has an enormous number of decentralized electrical generation. There's all sorts of farmers in the shadow of wind turbines, and they're very supportive of this because they're investors in it. So a lot of what is centralized infrastructure is actually invested in by the citizens and small business people and farmers of the Netherlands because they're committed as a nation, as individuals, to that.
That commitment to a green future runs deeper than policy. It's existential.
They know more intimately than almost any nation what it means if the sea encroaches, because so much of their land is reclaimed from the sea. The country is crisscrossed with canals, draining water to huge pumps that pump it into the ocean. I visited one of those pumping stations. It had 3 megawatts of electric pumps taking water up 5 meters to put it into the ocean from a major canal. And so the water level of the canal itself varies when the pumps are on quite substantially over its distance. The pumps used to be diesel pumps, but once again, they were replaced with electric pumps, which are much quieter and obviously much cleaner, and powered by electrons in many cases from that wind, solar, and battery farming.
The Netherlands isn't just generating clean power. They're creating an entire ecosystem of solutions. It's practical engineering married to climate necessity. But what about countries that don't have the Netherlands' wealth, infrastructure, or engineering heritage? That's where Pakistan's story becomes extraordinary.
Pakistan had a weak grid, and so they had unreliable and high-cost electricity. But Pakistan is already a major contributor to the global textiles, with about 8.5% of its GDP from its textile industry. These are not trivial enterprises, and they were suffering because the textile industry needs a few things. It needs heat and it needs electricity for looms. And so when there was a glut of solar panels because of China's overproduction, the governing classes and the regulatory agencies didn't put tariffs on them. They didn't prevent people from installing them. So people just imported container loads of solar panels and put them on every flat surface they could.
YouTube videos showed people how to install panels themselves. Business owners facing unreliable power that threatened their livelihoods took matters into their own hands.
And all of a sudden, there was 17 gigawatts of solar in a single year, 2024. That was fascinating to watch, and it was purely a matter of the regulatory agencies and the country getting out of the way of the people. So this is a lesson to take away for countries that are in the developing world is don't put tariffs on either solar or batteries from China, and don't put barriers in the way of people just deploying it on rooftops or their side lot. Just let them fill their boots. And all of a sudden, there will be massive decarbonization.
But here's where Pakistan surprises again. While that grassroots solar boom was happening from the bottom up, the government was quietly building infrastructure from the top down.
They built a quite extraordinary HVDC backbone, high voltage direct current backbone, north to south in the country to allow electrons to flow more easily. Similarly, you may have heard of reconductoring of transmission lines.
Reconductoring is the process where steel core power lines, which have a tendency to heat up and sag in hot weather, are replaced with carbon fibre ones to provide a more efficient and effective supply of electricity.
It's big news in North America and Europe. One study found that 85% of the United States needs could be met by a combination of reconductoring plus some digital line assessments. Pakistan has already reconductored 60 to 70% of its transmission. The West is just discovering reconductoring. Pakistan is already almost finished.
Let that sink in. Pakistan experiences extremes of heat, regularly peaking above 50 degrees in summer. This heat was making their electricity supply unreliable, so they fixed it. What we're seeing in both the Netherlands and Pakistan isn't purely top-down or bottom-up, it's hybrid. The Netherlands has rooftop solar on record numbers of homes and gigawatt-scale wind farms that communities invest in. Pakistan has 17 gigawatts of behind-the-meter solar installed by individuals and a modernised high-voltage direct current backbone, moving power efficiently across the country. And Michael's analysis suggests this pattern will repeat further.
I think Africa is going to be the place that surprises us next. The African Continental Free Trade Area was ratified, and now, as of 2024, 48 countries have signed it, enabling better governance and freer trade and removal of barriers to market economies in Africa, which is going to float the entire continent's boat. And last year, we saw an uptick in imports of Chinese batteries and solar panels. We can already see the bones of everything that will transform Africa. They are energy impoverished, and they will not be energy impoverished in the coming years. It's a fascinating time to watch Africa.
Falling costs for solar and batteries are creating opportunities across the world that didn't exist even 5 years ago. But perhaps most importantly, this transition offers something oil and gas never could: genuine energy security.
We're in a landscape where energy security has become top of mind. After the European energy crisis due to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, energy prices spiked globally. But there is nothing more secure than the electricity you generate from renewables within your own borders and your own waters. You're not dependent upon anybody for the wind that flows over your land or the sun that lands. Electricity is so much more efficient than a fossil fuel economy. We will actually need 40 to 50% of the primary energy input to get the same energy services that actually deliver economic value. And of course, we won't be spending all the money on the negative externalities of air pollution and water pollution. But it's secure electricity. We control it.
We control it. After 2 centuries of dependence on coal mines in distant valleys, on oil from unstable regions, on gas from nations that use it as a weapon, the future Michael describes is radically different. Not because every country becomes isolated, but because every country becomes capable. The crocodile's jaws are opening. GDP decoupling from emissions, not everywhere yet, not all at once, but across 90% of the world's GDP, it has begun. And once you see it, in Dutch wind farms invested in by local farmers, in Pakistani rooftops covered in panels installed by textile workers, in the coming transformation across Africa, you can't unsee it. And here in Britain, we are part of this revolution. Let's return to Jonathan Brearley.
When I think about this transition that we're on, I go back to our history. So we were the country that provided coal that led to the first industrial revolution. We were the country that after the war built out the grid at massive pace to make sure we connected all those local networks to provide what customers needed. Now, through all of that, people and companies have had to adapt to the world that we are in. And we are on another revolution now. We are building renewables at pace. We are making sure that we have a system that operates for customers, but most importantly, we are building a system through the low carbon transition that we hope will work for customers. Now, all of us in this industry need to make sure that when we make this transition, when we design the new products and services that customers need, when we think about the changes they might need in their homes, we have those customers at the heart of what we do. We are a proud group of engineers, but we need to be a proud group of people that can do everything they can for the customers that we serve. That's a new set of skills, but one I'm optimistic that not only within the UK we can do, that the people can do globally. Once again, we'll be an energy leader.
My thanks to author Michael Barnard and Ofgem CEO Jonathan Brearley for the fascinating glimpse into the future of energy. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who might also like it. I'm Claire Nazir. Inside Energy is a Bengo Media production for Ofgem.